Palumbo here with an RX Muscle news update. The Arnold Classic 2020 competitor list has been released, and I have Shawn Ray in a very, very nice Ritz-Carlton restaurant overlooking the shoreline of California. I'm not that jealous of you because it is really nice down here in Florida as well, but thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, brother. Good to be home. I just finished a world tour, so
I know you were all over the freaking place.
Huh?
You were all over the place. Every time you texted me, it was like another country.
Yeah, and I think the explosion of what Jim Mannion had in mind for the NPC worldwide after 2 years is now solidified. I mean, we are all over the freaking place. But remember, Dave, back when we were coming up, we had the IFBB, which was everywhere. Ben Weider planted the seeds, and of course Raphael and those guys, but it didn't include all of us. Like the U.S. guys weren't going there. They were all kind of coming here, and they were coming singularly. I mean, every once in a while you'll see a Barry DeMay or you hear of a Gary Stridham. I mean, like one at a time, right? These guys weren't able to turn pro on this IFBB circuit that they were on.
Right.
And now, of course, you're able to go to China and they're giving out 8 pro cards. And I just came back from where the hell did I just come back from? I just came back from Italy. They gave out 8 pro cards over there. And so
that's why you didn't see any guys coming into the IFBB, because they would give 1 pro card for the whole Europe, basically, right? The World Championships.
I think that has to be understood because people keep saying they're giving out pro cards like candy. Well, what they weren't doing for decades was they weren't giving out pro cards. So you weren't having a real international feel because they weren't allowed to turn pro.
Right. And you know what, Shawn, I understand when you guys competed, the pro card was like, it was so hard to get that everyone knew every pro, and that's great. But there's nothing wrong with having a lot of pros because the cream will still rise to the to the top. You still you might have crappy pros, you might have good pros. Who cares? I mean, a pro card may not be as valuable as it was, but the top guys are still the top guys.
Right, and the bottom feeders, they fall off after a while. They realize the water's too deep, they can't swim, and they just fucking drown, right? And like you said, the swimmers will swim. But in the past 2 years, going to these different countries, going over to Iraq and going over to Kuwait and these different places, I think it's ingenious what Jim Mannion has done in terms of making it more inclusive. And, of course, with all these new divisions, we're going to have more athletes in the bikini, the classic, and the physique. I mean, it sounds like a watered-down effect. Yeah. But someone was getting very rich off of not allowing people to turn pro, and that was the IFBB by itself. Right. So the IFBB Pro League is much more inclusive. Yeah, I wanted to establish that.
Now, I saw you went to the pyramids, and that's a place I wanted to go to. And I always envisioned the pyramids as this like majestic. I always envisioned it as like Las Vegas, but it really looks like someone's like trailer park with all of a sudden these pyramids in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and flies and, poverty. It's a third world country, to be sure. We were over at the Four Seasons, which wasn't far from there. It was about a 40-minute drive. And, I mean, you would have thought you were at the Ritz-Carlton here in California. Yeah. But as you roll up on the pyramids, you're going back in time. I mean, you're going right into the freaking poverty. And the pyramids are surrounded by all these, like, Cleopatra Motel or Ramesses Inn. Yeah. But, dude, you don't want anything to do with any of those. If you ever take a tour – you don't want to stay at the hotel that's right at the pyramids because I tell you, you won't want to go outside. It's a very scary place, and they were warning us to kind of like watch our back, keep your head on a pivot, because it's right for tourists coming in there, and then it's hard to manage the crime rate. And there's also I did a little historical fact checking about 2 years ago. I think there was 38 Swiss that got shot down at the Luxor, so it's still a volatile. Yeah, it almost looks like a war-torn area outside the majestic pyramids. Right. It's just if somebody goes in there, a developer, and drops a 5-star hotel, they make a small fortune because all the tourists would want to stay right there at the pyramids. But they're way back in time. It was definitely one of those feelings. I'm like when you watch the 10 Commandments type thing. I thought, this is where this was. It couldn't have been filmed there. It was probably had to be a set because man, it was filthy. It was filthy, but it's one of the 8th wonders of the world for sure.
Was there a lot of energy in there? I mean, did you experience anything like supernatural when you went into them?
Nothing supernatural, but the moment wasn't lost. I was on horseback with Chris Cormier. They pulled us up in a little chariot type ride, and
I saw that.
And I took myself historically to a place where I could feel and sense the time and the enormity of these freaking boulders that they put these 3 pyramids together with, and of course the Sphinx was there. But to think that they've been there as long as they have, it definitely gives you appreciation for the craftsmanship, but you understand how many people died making those freaking pyramids. Those were slaves that built that stuff.
Can you go inside them?
You can, but there's nothing there. They've excavated all that stuff, put them all in the museums and stuff like that. So you can go inside. I'm claustrophobic. I don't want to go into something and there's nothing there.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's like a tomb. That's what you're really going into anyway.
Let me tell you, bodybuilding's taken me a lot of places, and that was on my bucket list. The other one was when I went to South Africa and I put my hands on the bars of the Nelson Mandela prison at Robben Island.
Wow.
I did 3 book reports on him in college and in high school. So to actually be there physically, and again, I have to thank the sport of bodybuilding for making those adventures possible.
Sure. It's I'm sure that was a moving place to go. All right, let's talk about the Arnold Classic.
Yes.
One of the best lineups I think we've had in recent years. I mean, aside from Shawn Rhoden, who's been excluded from the lineup, it seems like we got an Olympia lineup here. I mean, we haven't seen Big Ramy all of 2019. He seems to be one of the stars in that lineup there. Dexter Jackson, surprisingly, in that lineup as well. I didn't think he was going to be doing it. Talk to me a little bit about who you think we have to really look out for in this lineup. Obviously, William Bonac and Rully Winkler as well.
Man, on paper, it's exactly what we want. But how many times has it ever lived up to the billing? Yeah. I'm praying like this lives up to the hype. This is the 32nd year. And of course, I've never missed it. I brag about that because, there's a lot of things in life that come up that will pull us away from what our passion is. Nothing has ever pulled me away from the Arnold Classic in terms of health or sickness. So I've witnessed every one of those champions come through the ranks. I've saw all of those guys win. We got 4 defending champions that know what winning that's like. We got Victor Martinez, Cedric McMillan, William Bonac, and Dexter Jackson. Those are 4 champions that have won it. Of course, Big Ramy has won over in, I think it was Brazil. Or no, over in Spain.
Spain.
Yeah,
and Brazil, right?
Yeah, so he's won a couple. On paper, you can't help but ignore the fact that this guy's had a very long offseason. He had a couple of injuries, had some training partner issues, and the divorce from Oxygen Gym. I'm not sure if he's back there or not. But I saw Ramy at the Olympia. And, of course, seeing him off-season is a lot more impressive than seeing him standing next to these genetic freaks on stage. He hasn't really materialized on the stage the way we want him to. Winning in Spain and winning in Brazil is not winning in Ohio. But that's the one that eludes him. That's the one that has his name on it. He has to get that to validate himself. Even Rully Winkler, he went to Australia and got the Arnold Classic, but he couldn't get it there in Columbus, Ohio. Dexter Jackson just made a video. He was talking about how good his off seasons are, but he woke up and his name was on the freaking list. He's like, I'm on the list? I guess I'm going to go ahead and do it. So he just committed right now to do that show at 50 years old.
I saw that, but do you really believe that? You don't think that Dexter had every intention of doing the show?
Sometimes, Dave, they just automatically assume. Dexter's probably done at least 10 Arnold Classics, right?
No, I know. He's got the most victories of any guy.
Yeah, so I think they probably just assume he's going to do it. And you know what? At his age, he might as well. He's got nothing to lose. He doesn't need more time off to build his body. I mean, he's in the twilight of his career. He's got 8 of those championships. Screw it. But
do you think it's like a little too much on his body? I mean, at this point, does it pay for him to even compete more than once a year?
Well, is it too much on his body? I mean, we've written Dexter off a couple of times. I remember 5 or 6 years ago, we were writing him off, and here he is doing the business. He was 4th in the Olympia. So we still have to consider the people he's competing against and the ones that he wasn't. I mean, there was no Shawn Rhoden, there was no Phil Heath. Things aligned for him perfectly at the Olympia with Big Ramy being out and, of course, Rully Winkler slightly being off. Dexter admits he wasn't on Friday, which is where he lost a ton of ground. Made it up on Saturday, and he wound up in 4th place. The guy to watch out for is this Patrick Moore. Patrick was in 10th place at the Olympia, but I had him battling it out with Dexter. So that being said, there could be a huge monkey wrench thrown into this thing if Patrick materializes, but I'm not going to write Dexter off for being a competitor because this is what he does. He's done it better than anybody else in the history of our sport. And whether you like him or not, he is Mr. Consistency when it comes down to these big freaking shows.
Yeah, well, he's always right there, waiting to step in when everyone else is a little off. But, he theoretically...
Good timing. He's smart.
But theoretically, he could also, he could be anywhere from 1st down to 7th place
Absolutely.
In this lineup, which is, scary because it really depends on how these other guys come in shape. He beats guys when they're off, but I don't know. He can't beat William Bonac. He can't beat Rully Winkler if they're in shape, anymore.
Well, here's the thing. When we say he can't, he has. His track record has shown that he's beaten all these guys.
Right, in the past. But do you believe that he could beat an in-shape Rully Winkler or William Bonac right now, or even Cedric for that matter?
To play devil's advocate, no.
Okay.
But didn't he beat Rolly Winkler at the Mr. Olympia?
Yeah,
Yes,
because
he
he
did.
was off. Yeah.
Of course, that's the operative word. He was off. None of these guys are predictably going to be ready on the day of the contest. I mean, how long have we been waiting for Cedric McMillan to arrive at the Olympia? Never. It's never happened. But he arrived at the Arnold Classic and he's won.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question. You are probably one of the most consistent guys on stage in terms of bringing conditioning, bringing a look that was very consistent. And people might criticize you, hey, he only did one show a year and he didn't do the tour and all that stuff. But you were very consistent. Why can't these guys be consistent? This is what they do for a living. How come how come by now they haven't figured it out?
Dude, listen, wisdom usually teaches us things that we can't see when we're in the middle of it. But in all these years, I cannot, for the life of me, figure out why these guys don't come in shape. I mean, it's one of those things. Are they looking at what the other guy is doing and just doing enough to get by? I used to look beyond what these guys were doing. I used to wake up at 8 o'clock and I think frickin' Gaspari and Livroni are already done training on the East Coast. I mean, I was hungry. I had to get my ass out of bed and I had to do my, fasted cardio and had to be disciplined on my diet. And I just don't see the discipline across the board with these guys trying to compete against each other. They're just kind of doing their own thing, and no one's really raising the bar. There's no breakout athletes. I mean, Patrick Moore is the closest thing to a breakout athlete that we've seen all season, and that's because he reminds us of a natural Ronnie Coleman back in the day. And we saw when Ronnie dropped the hammer, he arrived. Patrick Moore could be that guy, but I don't really see a whole lot, or I don't have a whole lot of expectation out of the guys. I think right now William Bonac's the front runner.
Sure.
Because of his youth and his size, but
he was second at the Olympia.
Well, and you got to remember, he's kind of the same situation I was in, is that he's maxed out. We're going to see the exact same thing with William Bonac. So if we already know what we're going to get with William Bonac, somebody else has to change their regime to appear differently. Cedric McMillan did about 5 or 6 shows, and he won a couple of them by the time the year was over. He just won over in Japan.
Have we seen the best of Cedric? You think it's only getting worse from here?
Cedric won over in Romania. If we've seen the best of Cedric, he's smart enough to pick the right shows to stay relevant and stay in the conversation, because he did wind up winning a couple competitions. He disappeared on the Olympia landscape with that special invite. But again, he's Mr. Spring. And if Phil Heath used to be Mr. Saturday Night, Cedric is Mr. Spring, because what has his track record shown us come the Arnold Classic? He's been in that hunt every time he's been there. He just hasn't made it happen at the Olympia. So this lineup in the spring is not the lineup we get in the fall.
Yeah.
Cedric is someone to talk about come Arnold Classic in spring, not necessarily in September at the Olympia.
He's also not getting any younger either, so it's getting harder. I think obviously he's not adding new muscle at this age.
But can't we say that about all of them? I don't think that Dexter's getting any younger. I can tell you Victor Martinez definitely isn't getting any younger. And Victor won this contest back in 2012. 2007?
No, 7. Yeah.
Yeah, 2007 he won this show. So it's been a hot minute, and we still can't write him 100% off on the preview. Going in, we got to mention Victor Martinez, but if we look at his track record, there's not a lot to talk about.
He's always a dangerous guy in the top 5 to break into, especially if guys are off.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as I see it, it's Ramy, Bonac, and Winkler's show to lose. And then, of course, you got to throw the wild card of Patrick Moore, and I think Akeem Williams.
You said Rolly Winkler.
What?
You said Rolly Winkler?
Yeah, I said Rolly Winkler.
Okay. So we were talking about Rolly a year ago. What was he, third? Third at the Olympia. And then he was third at the Olympia, then he went to Australia and won the Arnold Classic.
Right.
Came to the Olympia with a hamstring tear that we knew about maybe 2 weeks before the competition. Right. And he gratuitously, I think, got 5th place or 6th place. Man, to go put my eggs into that basket again. I mean, I would have taken the year off if I was Rolly Winkler. He definitely looks like he needs more time off. This is coming too fast for him. I can't talk about Rolly and the top 3 in the same sentence.
Okay, so you're saying you don't think he's going to bring it?
I think he needed to take that break. His body was already hurting. He had hurt his knee the previous year, his hamstring this year. Didn't live up to the expectation. He was lucky that Shawn Rhodes and Phil Heath and Big Ramy weren't in the show, because he was he 5th place at the Olympia or 6th place?
5th.
All right, you put those 3 guys in, and he's 8th. We're not even talking about Rolly Winkler. Right. In this scenario, I don't think he's taken enough time off to address his situation, his health. He needs to be healthy to talk about him as number 1. I don't think he's going to be a factor in Columbus, Ohio. William Bonac is not a shoo-in, but he's working with a lot less Like, he's small, he's compact, he's like Labrada, he's like myself. He doesn't need a whole lot of adjustments coming off of the Olympia.
Right.
He wants that victory. He wants that paycheck. We're going to get exactly what we expect from William Bonac. Someone's got to come in and bring something different, and that could be Big Ramy. He could dwarf him on the stage. It's not even comparable.
Do we know who Big Ramy is working with now? It seems like every year it's a different person. I don't know. Have we heard anything?
Yeah. It's amazing, all these guys bouncing around. We know that William Bonac benefited by not working with Neil Hill. He won, and he got to keep 20% of his prize money, right?
Sure.
And I think he looked significantly better. Neil didn't necessarily agree with that, but I was sitting there. William was better this year than he was last year. Big Ramy coming into the contest, I think it's more of a head game than it is a physical one. He's got to have his head straight. He's got to believe that he can actually win this damn thing. I don't know who he's working with, nor does it matter. We know what he's capable of and what he's not. And right now, he has to. If he doesn't deliver in Ohio, he might as well go back to his fishing boats. Right?
The bold statement, Shawn. Exactly. Now,
back to the fishing boats.
We've anointed him as the heir apparent, and he still hasn't really lived up. You're right. If he can't win the Arnold Classic, he's going to have a tough time. But I have a feeling that this Arnold Classic lineup is going to be a tougher lineup than the Olympia was.
It could be. On paper, this looks like an Olympia lineup. We're missing only basically one component. We can't really talk about Roden. He's a non-factor. He's a non-issue. It's not the X factor. And Kai Green is basically retired. And until Phil Heath says something about his career, there's nothing to talk about regarding Phil Heath. So talking about the ones that are doing the business, Brandon Curry was never planning on coming back to defend this title. He's earned that long-deserved break, and he'll be one of those guys that potentially can improve by the Olympia, and rightfully so. We've seen it happen with Phil Heath and some of those guys. On the tail end of their runs, though, we've seen them diminish. Every one of those Olympias, Ronnie Coleman, Dorian Yates, Jay Cutler, Phil Heath, they've all diminished on the way down as they hold on to the title and gotten older. Brandon Curry is one of the guys now with a full year, could potentially come in better next year for that competition. But at this one right now, we have to keep William Bonac as the front runner because, one, he's won it. Two, he's beaten the entire lineup, including Dexter Jackson.
Right.
And he's got nothing to lose. He doesn't have any injuries. He's not sick. I mean, why not?
He's very consistent too. If we always see him in shape, and I think at the Olympia he was a little too flat. I liked his look at the Arnold, and I think had he looked at, even though he didn't win the Arnold, I think him and Curry were so close. I think had he looked like he did at the Arnold at the Olympia, he would have won the Olympia.
Two things we can't ignore here is that William Bonac, number one, is not a Dexter Jackson. So he did the Arnold Classic. He did the Arnold Classic over in Australia. He did the Olympia. He did a couple of shows thereafter. This is a tough run-up to the Arnold Classic. I mean, it comes at a blink of an eye, and he hasn't taken his foot off the gas. That could work to his detriment. I am curious, though, to see what Patrick Moore brings to the Arnold Classic stage.
I think he's the wild card. I think Akeem Williams could be another wild card there. I don't know if he's going to vie for the title, but I think he's a guy who's steadily improving as well, and I think that we need to keep an eye on him. But I think Patrick Moore is the most exciting guy in the lineup because if he does improve even 3 to 5 pounds of muscle, it's going to be, a lot of guys are going to be crying because he's going to be putting them in the rearview mirror.
Well, I think he served notice. I mean, I think people caught up with Patrick Moore a little too late in the game because he's nobody out of nowhere. But he did win the California Championships. He's working with the technician Lee Labrada, who's a masterful poser, and you can see it. It's paying dividends for Patrick Moore. People are noticing this guy's taking time out to do a performance. And if that's what he brings to Columbus, Ohio, the way that Cedric McMillan did a couple of years ago when Arnold anointed him like the next big thing, Patrick could step right in there. And now the judges know who he is. He gets that first call out, man, we could see a whole different animal coming out of Columbus, Ohio.
And he's got that fresh-looking muscle that we just haven't seen in a lot of guys lately. And I remember when Ronnie first started kind of almost winning shows, and he won a show here or there, and people took
96.
notice, but they didn't really take him seriously until he won that night of champion against Livroni. And then people were like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah, that was circa 96, man. And then Ronnie Coleman blew on the scene in 97, and he wound up in 9th place at the Mr. Olympia, and in 98 he never looked back. And of course, we saw him get better for a very short period of time before he just kind of overdid it. Patrick Moore has that kind of potential. I think they're being a little conservative what he can do, and I don't think he has to change a whole lot because we like what he brought. I mean, nobody said that Patrick has to be bigger. Nobody said he has to be harder. He just has to keep bringing what he's bringing, and I think our eyes are going to gravitate to that. Look, because that's really what we want. That's what our sport needs.
Sure. I agree with you. Well, it's going to be a great Arnold Classic lineup, obviously. It's always nice when we have a lot of guys in there who could potentially win the event. And,
Yes.
we haven't seen that for the last couple of years. This is going to be something we're going to keep an eye out for. Obviously, stack lineup, Lionel Baiki, William Bonac, Max Charles, Big Ramy, Dexter. What's with Johnny Jackson? I wanted to ask you. Johnny Jackson making a comeback, huh?
I'm really surprised. I MC Johnny Jackson's show in August out there in Fort Worth, Texas. And he was big as a house, but I remember that he tore his quad a couple years back. He's a contest promoter. He's doing his thing out in Texas, and then boom, he puts his name on there. Some guys just, you know how it is. It's like boxing, Dave. Some of these guys, they get too much time on their hands, and the next thing you know, they go back to doing what they're most familiar with, what makes them happy, what gives them purpose. This is not a contest that's going to stand out in the memory of Johnny Jackson, I don't believe. There's nothing on that stage for him. And I think the level of competition has surpassed him. And that time off hasn't served him well because these guys never took their foot off the gas.
Right.
So Johnny being in the show is definitely it's something that maybe he personally wants to do for God only knows what reason. But it's not going to be something we're going to be talking about when the show's over.
Another wild card I think we have to mention is Steve Kuklo, who really was very impressive at the Olympia. Structurally, he stands with these guys. He's got a big frame. He can stand next to Big Ramy on stage. He can stand next to a Patrick Moore and maybe even make them look, narrow in a sense because he's so wide. Is this a guy we have to watch out for as a top 5?
Yeah, I mean, I think Patrick Moore needs Steve in this contest because that's his yard mark. I thought those two could have flip-flopped in terms of where they wound up. And remember, Patrick was 10th in the Olympia, right?
Yeah.
He didn't get a fair comparison with Steve Kuklo. I'd like to see that happen in Columbus, Ohio, because I think they're more comparable than they are different. But Steve is starting to arrive maturity-wise where he needs to be, but we're going to find out whether or not the Olympia was a fluke or whether or not Steve is actually the real deal. Steve is a top 6 competitor in any lineup. He's proven that by winning the Indianapolis Pro twice to get back to the Mr. Olympia each year, and his 6th place was the best that he ever did in his life. So we have to assume that he's starting to hit his peak. Whether or not that materializes in March, we'll find out because, again, it comes up super fast close to the Olympia. There's a reason I only did 3 Arnold Classics, man, because after the Olympia, you have these appearances that you make and you go on tour, and then you have your cake and ice cream, and then it's the new year and you got 2.5 months to get ready for the Arnold, and you're like, shit.
Right.
You run out of time, and when you're dealing with that kind of size, that kind of mass, it may be too soon for Steve to jump right back into the fray.
Can Sergio Oliva Jr. pull off the victory here? Here's a guy with the genetics behind him for sure. His father being a former Mr. Olympia. He won the New York Pro a couple years ago in really spectacular fashion. A lot of people were touting him as the next big thing. He seems to be adding size little by little every year. Could this be a breakout show for Sergio?
Nah, this is too deep. He's in the deep end. He's with the Sharks. He's with the big boys. This is not a contest that he probably thought was going to shape up with names the way that it has. It's turned into an Olympia lineup, and if you put him in the Olympia, we're not talking about him. This isn't something where his dad's name will help him solidify a placing in the top 6. This lineup is an Olympia lineup, and we know that Sergio doesn't belong on that level of competition. He's a good pro, but he's not a great pro. He won't be in the top 6 here.
Can he ever be a great pro in your estimation?
Well, he's not young. I mean, he's not that young anymore. He used to be kind of young, and age favored him, but his inactivity doesn't show the improvements. And you'd expect a guy that takes that kind of time off, you would expect some certain gains and some certain quality and characteristics that are different. And he's bounced around from one trainer to the next. He's probably had at least 3 or 4 different people. Tom Platz.
Chris Aceto's been, I think, working with him the last couple of years.
Yeah. So you got Chris Aceto, Tom Platz, Chris Cormier, Lila Brada was working with him. He worked with Gaspari briefly, right. I believe, but he can't get the formula right, and his dad has nothing to do with it. He's on record as saying his dad never helped him. His dad was retired by the kid by the time he was a teenager. But that being said, it has nothing to do with him. It has to do with this lineup. He's not in that conversation when we're talking about the top 6 guys in this lineup, the same way if we were talking about the Mr. Olympia, he wouldn't have been in the conversation for the top 10 of the Olympia. So the only surprise he's going to be able to do at this competition is maybe hit his peak. And I don't think we've actually seen his peak for various reasons. I was there in New York when he won that competition, but I believe he beat John De La Rosa or someone. I'm not sure, but you're only as good as the guys you stand next to. And he's about to stand with some of the best in the world, and he's just not in that conversation.
Josh Lenardowitz missed the Olympia. He had a brain tumor. It was removed.
Yes.
He's on the comeback trail. He's ready to compete. He said he's ready to do this.
I know, Dave. You're talking to the wrong guy. I mean, I don't know what the hell Josh is thinking. This is not a contest for him. I'm not going to tell anybody to end their career, but I'll tell you what. I got something going on with my brain. The last thing I want to do is professional bodybuilding. This is not for the faint of heart. We've seen people die for less. We've seen people crippled. We've seen people with their hips blown out, their knees blown out, shoulder injuries, bicep tears, all that kind of crap. We're talking about the brain. You only got one. Mm-hmm. And you put the stress on your body to be the best in the world. It's a very dangerous game that Josh is playing. I wish nothing but the best for him. I know he's a new father about a year ago.
Yeah.
This is not where I want to see Josh Lenardowitz at on any level. Not to mention, it's hard enough to train when you're 100% focused and healthy. When you're training with something in the back of your mind that could potentially be life ending, it's not. You're training with caution, and you can't do this sport and train with caution and expect yourself to be a success. I don't think he should be here.
That's a very good point. I don't think anyone's ever really addressed that. When you train with caution, you can't be your best, and I agree with that, because I remember even when I was competing in the early part of my career, there is no caution. You get under weights that probably can crush you and destroy you. You take supplements that are dangerous, obviously. You gain enormous amounts of weight. You subject your body to crazy amounts of cardio and stress and starvation and stuff. You can't really look back, right? I mean, if you do have anything where you might second guess yourself, that's why I always felt when I competed, it was great, because I didn't have a family, I didn't have kids. There was nothing that there was nothing that was blocking me out from doing what I wanted to do.
Right, and so you're at a disadvantage coming out of the box. I mean, this guy's a father. He's got other things going on. Professional bodybuilding, I would imagine, would be the furthest thing from my mind if medically I was having my brain looked at. This, mind you, the Olympia wasn't his first show that he missed. Remember, he was supposed to do the Arnold Classic a couple of years ago that he missed. He watched one of his good friends, Dallas McCarver, literally die in the same place that he was at. So he had to go through that whole trauma. And then he had this brain thing, and now he's jumping back into this for what? For who? I mean, there's no upside to what Josh Lenardowitz is doing. May he prove me wrong. I just professionally and at my age, I feel it's a mistake. There's no redeeming qualities going to come from this competition for Josh.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what Josh brings. I'm sure when you're so in love with something that you do, and this is what he's great at. He still.
Let me stop you, Dave. Let's compare this to football. You have a brain injury. Something happens in your head. You think they want you back on that field?
Right.
If you're a boxer, they want you back on that field. If you're a baseball player or a basketball, if you're any other sport except this independent sport of bodybuilding, would they even allow you to participate?
There's contact involved in these other sports, obviously. So that
well, but you can't tell me there's no contact here, man. I strained a muscle in my neck getting ready for the very first Arnold Classic in 1989. And 5 weeks out, I pulled out because every time I went to strain and curl and press and pull, I would feel it at the base of my neck, at the bottom of my head. It wasn't a brain situation. It was a muscle sprain. And it kept me out of the 1989 Arnold Classic, and I got suspended for a year for being injured. But I think it prolonged my career because I took my foot off the gas, allowed myself to heal, and I came back and I won the Ironman a year later. This is a situation where we're not talking about a strain in the muscle. We're talking about the brain.
Yeah.
That had to happen. That had to come from somewhere. And the stress we put on our body is enough. Now you got this brain that you're dealing with. A word of caution, man. Listen to your body.
Well, you're right. I mean, a lot of, tumor growth and stuff like that can definitely stem from stress and a suppressed immune system and stuff like that. And, you have to know your limitations. And I'm sure Josh has gotten clearance from the doctors, and hopefully, he'll bring his best.
Are you sure? Are you sure?
I don't know.
We're talking about a bodybuilder. Yeah. Most bodybuilders aren't going, hey, doc, am I okay to go compete? Hey, doc, am I okay to compete? No, we self-diagnose ourselves.
Yeah.
And we go based on how we feel. The doctor's not in the gym training you and watching you and monitoring you and getting CAT scans and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I think it's a foolish attempt at trying to live the dream. I think Josh should have let that ship sail and do his thing. That's my opinion. What do I know? But I know I value my life and my health over a title. And this is a title that's going to be very elusive. This is one that he's not just going to be able to snatch away from these guys. This is an Olympia lineup.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Wrong show, wrong time.
Let's give me your opinion on Akeem Williams' chance. I mean, a lot of people felt he was overlooked at the Olympia. He's made some good improvements. His back's still obviously not up to the snuff of some of these other guys. Where do you see Akeem falling in this lineup?
Yeah, I mean, Akeem's got to be in the right lineup, and he was in New York where he got second place. He was in the right lineup to really be noticed next to Juan Morel. Let's not talk about Akeem. Let's talk about Juan Morel, who wound up winning 2 shows this past year and didn't make the top 10 of the Olympia. Did he? Was he top 10 or was he ninth, somewhere in there?
Somewhere in there, yeah. He was.
All right. But Akeem had a hard time trying to beat Juan Morel. This is a top 6 lineup that Juan Morel would struggle to try to break into. So the knock on Akeem isn't that he doesn't have enough muscle. It's that his skin is thick. We know that. Stevie Wonder can see how thick this skin is. It's like Victor Richards, right?
Yeah.
He just can't rip it up, and it's either because he's got so much muscle. The back, as thick as it is, it reminds you of kind of an Orville Burke. He's got the size, but he doesn't have the crevasses and the detail and the thinness of the skin, which he will never have. So he's got to pick the right show to really shine. This is not the show that Akeem Williams is going to shine in with these genetic freaks in this lineup. He'll look impressive in the symmetry round, but after that, he's going to fade because he just is not going to bring that quality detail. He'll never have the quality detail. He brings an element of muscle to the stage, and if he picks the right show, he can win. Sure. He's proven it. He's proven that he's a contender. But in the Arnold Classic and Olympia lineups, we really start to see the differences of some of these genetic freaks.
Interesting. Well, it's going to be an Arnold for the ages for certain. I'm sure Jim Lorimer and Bob Lorimer and Arnold are probably very happy that they're going to see such a competitive lineup finally coming back to Columbus, Ohio, for the 2020. I mean, this is a new decade we're entering here.
Shawn, yeah, it is. It's crazy.
Yeah, real quick, when you think about it, I wanted to get your overall impression. Where do you saw that what the 2000s and the 2010s showed? What's the 2020s going to reveal for our sport? Where do you think it's going? Is it going to go upwards, backwards a little bit? Obviously, we got classic physique that's really rocketing off now. Where do you see the 2020s taking bodybuilding?
I think it's going to streamline, Dave. I think the 2020s are going to bring the bodybuilders back to some sense of normalcy, and they're going to bring back some of the aesthetics of the sport of bodybuilding. We have some veterans already complaining about the lack of posing and the lack of presentation and the way the bodybuilders are standing. There's no fluidity, and the older generation is now trying to bring the attention to the IFBB Pro League and to the NPC so that they can educate these guys on the proper way to stand, the proper way to pose. And I just don't see the dinosaurs that were dominating the sport, the big guys. I think it's going to kind of downsize. It's going to take a step back in terms of the size, but we're going to start to see more Patrick Moores. I think they're going to start rewarding some of those guys that are on the less muscular, freaky, anabolic side and more towards the aesthetic side. It's going to be classic physique 2.0, but I don't think it's going to be the Dorian Yates, Ronnie Coleman, Jurassic Park era going into the 2020s. I think they are going to reel it back in a little bit so it becomes a little bit more mainstream.
Yeah, but Shawn, you know how when Ronnie first won in like 98, 99, he had that kind of a streamlined, just freaky, dense, waistline looked really good. And then, poof, he blew
it out.
Do you see that happening from a Patrick Moore? Like, we get this beautiful looking physique and everything's in right. He's got good conditioning, good muscle size. And then all of a sudden, boom.
I don't think he has to drop the bomb, Dave. He doesn't.
I think these guys can't help themselves. I think as a bodybuilder, even Dorian said it. Dorian's like, I didn't need to be any bigger, but I thought I could just go a little beyond this. A little beyond.
But remember, Dorian was chasing Haney, and Haney was a big boy, and Dorian was the same height. I think Patrick Moore, he's not in that same conversation. He's reminiscent of a Ronnie, but he's a million miles away from what Ronnie did. We'll never see again.
Yeah.
And I think with Labrada in his ear, he's going to remind him that this is a sport of aesthetics and beauty, and this is a big guy trying to pose kind of like Lee, and he's definitely got the right mentorship.
Yeah.
If he doesn't try to fix what's not broken, he could be the future look of what they want to measure everybody up against. He doesn't, because I think in the right time, in the right lineup with Brandon Curry there, with Shawn Rhoden there, or with the Phil Heath there, we're not going to be able to take our eyes off of a guy like Patrick Moore because that's what we long for. That's what we used to like. That's what we used to want to be like. And we're going to get back there. If he continues on the path he's going and he doesn't blow himself out because he doesn't have a guru trying to load him up, not only will he be around for a long time, but we will come to look for other people that look like that, and
Right.
the judges will start to reward that look. The guys will realize that, hey, I might have some longevity. I don't have to blow up. Dallas McCarver would still be here if he didn't feel he had to blow the F up.
Yeah.
And the people that were in his ear loading him up is why he's not here today. I don't think Patrick Moore has that in his corner. And I'm praying that somebody like Patrick Moore actually wins, because it will send a message loud and clear that you don't have to be 290 pounds to win.
Yeah. Well, we're going to find out in the beginning of March 2020. For now, Shawn, I want to just thank you for taking time to talk about the Arnold Classic. Next week, we'll be doing our year-end wrap-up with Shawn and going over all the crazy stories from 2019.
There's a lot of them.
We are out of time. I'm Dave Palumbo for Shawn Ray. We'll see you next time.
All right.